I never thought selling furniture on Craigslist could end up like this. It was just a couch I needed to get rid of, you know? Nothing special. I posted the ad with a few pictures, a reasonable price, and waited. After a couple of days, I got a message from a guy named Josh. He seemed normal, maybe even too polite for the typical Craigslist responder. He asked if he could come by that same afternoon to check it out. I hesitated a bit because I don't like having strangers in my house, but I really wanted the couch gone. So I gave him my address and waited. He showed up exactly on time, which was a good sign. He didn't look like someone you'd consider suspicious. Just a regular guy, maybe in his early 30s, wearing jeans and a plain t-shirt with neatly combed hair. He had a friendly smile and even asked if he should take his shoes off before coming in. I showed him the couch, explained that it was in great condition, it just didn't fit in my living room anymore after some renovations. He seemed interested, even sat down to see how comfortable it was. Everything was going smoothly. He said he'd take it, paid in cash on the spot, and we arranged for him to come back the next day with a friend to pick it up. The whole thing went so smoothly I felt silly for being so paranoid at first. But it was after he left that I noticed something strange. As I closed the door, my eyes automatically went to the spot where I always keep my spare key. A discreet hook near the entrance. It wasn't there. I'm very careful about that key because it's the only spare I have, and I never move it. At that moment, I thought maybe I'd put it somewhere else and forgotten. It's not unheard of. Sometimes we do things on autopilot. But just to be safe, I locked all the doors and windows before going to bed that night. The next day, when he returned with his friend to pick up the couch, I forced myself to act normal. I didn't want to seem suspicious or give him any reason to think I was paranoid. But as they carried the couch out, I noticed something unsettling. Josh was quieter this time, not the same chatty, friendly guy he had been the day before. And his friend? He never looked directly at me, which only made me feel more uneasy. As soon as they left, I went straight to check the hook again. The key was still missing. That night, I tried not to think too much about the missing key. Maybe it had fallen somewhere, or I really had put it in a different place without realizing it. But no matter how much I tried to convince myself, something about it kept nagging at me. It was one of those strange feelings like when you know someone's watching you. I lay in bed with the TV on to distract myself, but every little noise in the house felt amplified. The wind outside, the creaking of old wood. Everything sounded louder than it should. And when I finally fell asleep, I had a weird dream. In it, someone was slowly opening my front door, so cautiously that the sound seemed to stretch on forever. The next day, I decided to search the entire house for the key. I turned over drawers, checked the pockets of jackets in the closet, even went through the trash, as ridiculous as that was. Nothing. And then came the detail that made my stomach drop. The back windows were unlocked. I was absolutely certain I had locked everything the night before. It's something I always do. I spent the whole day trying to find logical explanations. Maybe I had overlooked it. Maybe I'd been more distracted than I realized. But that night, as I was watching TV in the living room, I heard a sound that made me freeze. Footsteps. Footsteps coming from upstairs. At first I thought it was just my imagination. The sound could have been anything. The wood settling, the wind, even my cat if I had one. But I live alone. I stayed sitting there for a few minutes, straining to hear it again, but everything was silent now. I climbed the stairs with my heart pounding, each step feeling heavier than the last. When I reached the top, I opened the bedroom door slowly, almost afraid of what I might find. There was no one there. Nothing seemed out of place at first glance. But as I turned to leave, I saw something on the carpet that wasn't there before. A footprint. A single footprint, like someone had been standing there for a while. I spent the next few hours awake, clutching a kitchen knife, trying to decide if I should call the police. But what would I even say? Someone broke into my house and left a footprint on the carpet? It sounded ridiculous, even to me. In the end, I just locked all the doors and windows again and stayed in bed with the lights on, listening to every creak and noise in the house. It was one of the longest nights of my life. The thought that someone could have a copy of my key and come in whenever they wanted left me completely paralyzed with fear. On the third day, I woke up with a strange feeling, like someone was watching me. It's the kind of thing you can't explain, but it makes every hair on your body stand on end. The first thing I did was check the security cameras I had installed last year, something I rarely did because my neighborhood had always been quiet. The footage from the night before showed something that made my stomach drop. Around 3 a.m., a shadow passed by the side of the house. I couldn't see the person's face, just the outline of someone wearing a hood, walking slowly and stopping near the living room window. They stayed there for about 2 minutes before moving out of frame, like they were listening or watching something. After that, I decided I wasn't spending another night in the house. I packed my things and went to a friend's place, but before I left, I checked everything one last time. That's when I found something else that made me question my sanity. In the basement, which I rarely went into, I found one of the kitchen chairs. It was positioned right in the center of the room, like someone had been sitting there. There was no way I could have done that. I never take anything down there, much less a chair. At that point, fear had completely taken over. I called my friend and told her I was on my way without giving her many details. I just needed to get out of there. I stayed away from the house for 2 days. During that time, I had all the locks changed by a locksmith and sent Josh a message on Craigslist, directly asking if he knew anything about the missing key. He never responded. When I went back home, everything seemed fine, but the feeling that something was off never went away. The next few nights were quiet. No noises, no footprints, but I still found myself waking up in the middle of the night, convinced I wasn't alone. To this day, I don't know what really happened. Maybe it was just a crazy coincidence. Maybe someone really did take my key. Or maybe I was just being paranoid. All I know is that after this, I never let strangers into my house again, no matter how harmless they might seem. I still think about Josh sometimes and wonder if he was involved or if he was just a normal guy, like he seemed to be. But honestly, I'd rather never find out. I always use Craigslist to find cheap tools and save some money. That week, I found the perfect listing. A nearly new set of tools for a ridiculously low price. The seller seemed eager to get rid of them, but I didn't think much of it. I replied to the ad, and we arranged to meet at his property, which was in a really isolated area, far from the city. When I got there, it was already late, almost dusk. The place was straight out of a horror movie. An old farmhouse with peeling paint, a shed nearby, and endless fields stretching in every direction. As I got out of the car, the seller was already waiting on the porch. He was a thin man, probably in his early 40s, wearing a dirty work jumpsuit. He seemed friendly, but there was something about his eyes that made me uneasy, something I couldn't quite pinpoint. He led me to the shed to show me the tools, and I have to admit, I was impressed. It was a complete kit, practically brand new. While I was looking over the tools, I noticed he seemed restless, glancing around as if expecting something. That's when I heard it. A muffled sound coming from the back of the shed, or maybe somewhere outside. It sounded like a scream, but so distant I wasn't sure. I looked at the seller and asked, "Did you hear that?" He laughed nervously and replied, "Oh, it's just the wind. This place is full of weird noises." He tried to change the subject, talking about how useful the tools were, but my focus had completely shifted. Something wasn't right, and I could feel it. I kept pretending to inspect the tools, but my heart was racing. The sound came again, this time a bit louder, and it was unmistakable. A scream, desperate, like someone crying out for help. I looked at him again, and he seemed tense, though still forcing a smile. "I already told you it's the wind," he insisted, his tone more firm this time, almost as if he wanted to force me to believe him. My gut was screaming at me to leave, but my curiosity kept me frozen in place. I just couldn't ignore it. Even though I was suspicious, I decided to keep looking at the tools so I wouldn't draw too much attention. I was trying to stay calm, but the atmosphere was getting increasingly unsettling. Every time I glanced toward the shed, it seemed like something moved in the shadows, but when I focused, there was nothing there. Casually, I asked about the shed, trying to sound uninterested, and he just shrugged, saying he stored old junk in there. But the way he avoided eye contact made me even more uneasy. When the seller stepped inside the house for a moment to grab some paperwork, I decided to approach the shed. Each step felt heavier, and my heart was pounding in my throat. I knew I shouldn't, but something inside me compelled me to go. When I got close to the door, I saw it was secured with a large, rusty padlock. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to listen. Suddenly the scream came again, louder and clearer this time, followed by what sounded like scratching noises. I stepped back, breathing hard, and that's when I felt someone behind me. I nearly jumped out of my skin when I turned around and saw the seller standing there, staring at me with that same unsettling smile. "I told you to stay away from the shed," he said, his tone much sharper now. He wasn't trying to be friendly anymore. I swallowed hard and tried to explain that I was just curious because of the noises, but he stepped closer, cutting me off. "You're here to buy tools, not snoop around. Let's finish this." "Oh," I walked back to my car with him right behind me, practically escorting me. He tried to act like nothing had happened, even cracking a few jokes as he handed me the tools and took my payment. But my instincts were screaming at me to get out of there as fast as I could. When I got in the car and started the engine, I glanced at the rearview mirror. He was still standing on the porch, watching me. The smile was gone, replaced with a look I'll never forget. Cold, empty, like he was calculating something. I drove back home as fast as I could, trying to piece everything together. There was something about that place that I couldn't shake, especially the sound of the screams and the seller's strange demeanor. When I got home, I sat on the couch, staring at the tools on the floor. They felt heavier than they should, not physically, but like they carried a strange weight with them. I decided I had to do something. Even though I didn't have much to go on, I called the police to report what I'd heard and seen. The call was short. I explained what happened, gave them the address of the place, and as many details as I could remember. The officer on the other end was polite but didn't seem to take it very seriously. Maybe I sounded paranoid, but I insisted something was wrong with that shed. She said they'd send someone to check it out and thanked me for the information. I felt a little better after that, but the uneasy feeling wouldn't go away. I barely slept that night. The next morning I woke up early and decided to check the listing again before heading to work. My heart sank when I saw that the ad was completely gone. The seller's profile had disappeared, like it had never been there. I felt even more disturbed, so I called the police again to see if they'd found anything. The answer was quick and blunt. They didn't find any house or shed at the address I gave. They told me it was just an empty field. I kept insisting, describing what I had seen, but they said there was nothing there. To this day, I don't know what happened. I'm absolutely sure of what I saw and heard, but it feels like that night was erased somehow. The tools are still with me, but I can't bring myself to use them. Every time I look at them, I get a chill down my spine. I've thought about throwing them away, but it's like they're a reminder that it all really happened. And the worst part is not knowing what was in that shed, or who, or what, was screaming for help. I've never been the type to believe in those creepy stories you read online. You know, the ones that sound like they came straight out of a cheap horror movie. But what happened to me a few months ago completely changed my perspective. It all started when my dog Buddy passed away. He was 14 years old and had been with me since college. When he was gone, the emptiness was unbearable. After a few days of grieving, I decided to look for another dog. Not to replace Buddy, but just to fill the silence in the house. That's when I came across this strange Craigslist ad. Adult dog for adoption. Free. Must go today. There was a picture of a black Labrador, and he looked healthy. The owner said he couldn't keep the dog anymore. The address was in a part of town I wasn't familiar with, but it seemed normal enough at first. When I arrived, a man greeted me at the door, and he looked more rushed than someone in his situation should be. He barely let me step inside, grabbed the dog by its collar, handed me a bag of dog food and a leash, and said something like, "Good luck. I hope he likes you." The whole exchange was so quick and strange that I probably should have been suspicious, but at the time I just thought he was eager to get rid of the dog. The dog, named Scout, seemed calm, although a bit nervous. He sniffed me once and hopped into my car without hesitation. The first night at home was relatively uneventful. Scout wandered around the house, sniffing everything like any dog would in a new place, and eventually curled up under the dining table. But for some reason he avoided the hallway leading to my bedroom entirely. I figured he was just nervous or needed time to adjust. Things started getting strange the next night, though. In the middle of the night, I woke up to a low growling sound. It wasn't the type of growl a dog makes when they sense another animal. It was quiet, constant, and unnerving. I turned on the light and saw Scout standing in the living room, staring intently at an empty corner. I tried to calm him down, but Scout seemed transfixed, as if he were seeing something I couldn't. He only stopped growling when I pulled his leash and led him into the bedroom with me. I chalked it up to my imagination. Maybe I was still emotionally shaken from losing Buddy. But the next night, things escalated. Not only did Scout refuse to go near the hallway, but he also wouldn't step into the kitchen. He planted his paws firmly at the doorway and started barking furiously at nothing. I walked into the kitchen with him, thinking there might be a mouse or some other animal scaring him, but there was absolutely nothing there. I started to feel uneasy, but I still couldn't figure out why. Maybe it was just the new environment, or maybe Scout had some trauma from his previous owner. I tried not to overthink it, but things kept escalating. On the third night, I was lying on the couch watching TV when I heard a noise coming from the bedroom. It was a slow, creaking sound, like someone had pushed the door open. I glanced over at Scout, who was lying next to me, but he was already alert, ears perked up. He jumped off the couch and froze in the middle of the living room, staring down the hallway. I swear, a chill ran down my spine. I stood up and called for him, but he wouldn't move. He just kept staring into the darkness. I grabbed my phone to use as a flashlight and walked toward the bedroom. When I got there, the door was open, but I was certain I'd closed it before lying down. Scout stopped at the entrance to the hallway, growling low again. I checked every corner of the room, opened the closet, even looked under the bed. Nothing. It was just me and him. I tried to convince myself that I'd left the door ajar by accident, but I wasn't so sure anymore. By this point, Scout was almost trembling, still focused on something I couldn't see. The next morning, as I was putting Scout's leash on to take him for a walk, I noticed something I hadn't before. His collar seemed way too new for a dog that his previous owner claimed to have had for years. It had a metallic clasp that looked more like a lock than a regular collar, and on the inside, there was a strange bump. When I looked closer, I realized it was a small device, like a chip or something. I don't know why, but my heart started racing. I took the collar off and stared at the thing, trying to figure out what it was. I spent the entire day thinking about what to do. Who puts a tracker on a dog? I started piecing things together. The previous owner's rushed behavior, Scout acting strange since he arrived, and now this device. I decided to open it up to see what was inside. Using a screwdriver, I managed to take apart the clasp, and when I finally opened it, I got even more confused. It was a GPS tracker, and it was active. I had no idea how I hadn't noticed it earlier. The question that kept repeating in my mind was, who was tracking the dog? And more importantly, why? That tracker made me feel paranoid. After taking it apart, I put all the pieces in a plastic bag and threw it away in the garage trash can. But the feeling of being watched didn't go away. Scout seemed calmer without the collar, but he still avoided certain parts of the house and occasionally stared into empty spaces, like he was seeing something invisible. That's when I decided to check the GPS history from the tracker. I plugged it into my laptop and, to my surprise, it showed not only recent movements, but also past locations where Scout had been before coming to me. There was a weird pattern. Besides the previous owner's address, the tracker logged several points around town I didn't recognize. But one location kept appearing, always late at night, a property way out in the middle of nowhere. I looked it up on Google Maps and saw that it was an abandoned warehouse. My curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to drive there to check it out. Scout grew restless as soon as we got in the car, almost like he knew where we were heading. When we arrived, I sat in the car for a while, trying to build up the courage to step out. The warehouse looked like it had been abandoned for years, but there were fresh tire marks in the dirt outside. Scout suddenly started barking out of nowhere, staring straight at the entrance. I took a deep breath, grabbed a flashlight from the glove compartment and got out. Scout didn't want to follow me, but I tugged at the leash, thinking it would be safer to have him close. Every step toward the warehouse felt like it took forever. Inside, the smell of mold was overwhelming, and the walls were covered in marks that looked like scratches. The worst part was the silence. There were no sounds of animals, wind, nothing. Scout was on edge, pulling against the leash as if he wanted to run away. Then I heard it, a loud clanging sound from somewhere deep inside the warehouse, like someone had dropped a metal object. I didn't stick around to investigate. I ran out as fast as I could, with Scout practically dragging me back to the car. I only stopped once we were locked inside with the doors shut. As I backed out, I saw a figure move past one of the warehouse windows, but I didn't stay to take a closer look. After that night, I never went back. Scout stayed with me for a few more weeks, but he started getting sick, almost like something was draining the life out of him. When he passed, I took the tracker far away and threw it into a river. I still don't know who was tracking the dog or why, but I know one thing for sure. I'm never taking anything free off the internet again. I've never been the type to believe the strange stories people post online, but after what happened to me and my wife last month, my view of the world has completely shifted. We've always loved hunting for antiques, especially at garage sales. It's kind of a hobby we've shared since we got married. So, when she found a Craigslist ad for a garage sale in an upscale neighborhood, it seemed like the perfect opportunity to find a unique piece and maybe snag a good deal. The ad was simple, just a few photos of old furniture and an address, but there was something promising about those pictures, you know? It looked like the owner had really good taste. That day we drove to the house, and at first glance, it was incredible. One of those massive mansions with a well-manicured lawn, white fences, the works. It was so perfect you could easily imagine the kind of people who lived there just wanting to get rid of valuable items because they had too much of everything. However, I found it odd that there wasn't anyone else there. Usually garage sales like this attract a crowd, but this time the place felt almost deserted, except for a man at the end of the driveway. He was friendly, maybe a bit too much. He smiled constantly and spoke in an exaggerated way, like he was trying to convince us that this was the best deal we'd ever find. After looking through a few things in the garage, some paintings, vases, nothing too exciting, he mentioned that the best items were in the basement and that he rarely showed them to anyone. My wife and I exchanged hesitant glances, but he seemed so convincing, you know? Like one of those salesmen who know exactly what to say to pique your curiosity. He led us to the basement door, opened it, turned on the light, and walked down first. I don't know why we followed. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe he just didn't seem like a threat. But it was a mistake. As soon as we got to the bottom, I heard the door close behind us. And the sound that followed, that sharp click, was the worst feeling I've ever had. The basement was small, with shelves full of dusty boxes, a few rusty tools and old furniture covered in sheets. The air was stale, with that musty smell that sticks in your nose. There was a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling, and its glow flickered like it was about to go out. Every shadow seemed to move, even though no one was moving. While my wife rummaged through the basement looking for another exit, or at least something we could use to break the door, I kept banging on it, trying to stay calm. But something about the whole situation felt so wrong. Why would someone lock us in here? While my wife kept searching, I noticed a small window near the ceiling. It wasn't big enough to climb through, but you could see outside, and it looked like the sun was already starting to set. That didn't make any sense because we had arrived there in the morning. It felt like time had moved much faster than it should have. The air felt heavier, and every creak of the floorboards above made my nerves worse. I tried to focus on the window, hoping we could open it enough to yell for help, but it barely budged. That's when we started hearing footsteps above us. They weren't hurried, but slow and deliberate, like someone pacing back and forth. I froze, listening, waiting to hear the man's voice. But it wasn't him. The sound was different, heavier, almost as if whoever was up there was dragging something with them. My wife whispered that she didn't want to stay there any longer, and honestly, neither did I. The idea of being trapped in a place where no one knew we were made my stomach churn. And then the lights started flickering. At first it was slow, then faster and faster until everything went dark. The basement fell silent, like even the sound of our footsteps had been swallowed by the darkness. My wife grabbed my arm tightly and I tried to turn on my phone's flashlight. But of course, there was no signal. The dim glow of the flashlight barely lit up the room, but the shadows felt heavier, almost alive. That's when we heard the strangest sound yet. It was a low groan coming from somewhere in the basement, but we couldn't pinpoint where. I don't know how to describe what happened next, but the groaning didn't stop. It was erratic, like someone struggling to breathe or quietly crying in the dark. My wife was so terrified she could barely speak, and I was just trying to figure out how to get us out of there before things got worse. I decided to search for anything we could use as a weapon, just in case. I found a rusty iron bar under one of the shelves and gripped it so tightly my hands started to hurt. Meanwhile, the sound seemed to be getting closer. We decided our only option was to try and force the door open. Slowly we climbed the stairs, with the flashlight guiding the way, but every step made the wood creak louder than it should have. Then, we heard something move behind us, back in the basement. This time, it wasn't the groaning. It sounded like something heavy being dragged across the floor. My instincts told me not to look back, but my wife turned her head out of reflex and let out a scream that echoed through the space. I don't know what she saw, but the look on her face told me everything I needed to know. I threw myself against the door with all my strength, over and over, until I heard the wood crack. Finally, we managed to break it open and ran without looking back. The hallway leading to the exit was pitch black, but we followed the faint light from outside. When we reached the garage, the man who had led us to the basement was nowhere to be seen. The place looked abandoned, as if no one had been there in ages. We sprinted to our car and drove away as fast as we could. Later, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. The house looked completely normal from the outside, but nothing about that basement made sense. A few days later, curiosity got the best of me, and I looked up the address online. What I found still gives me chills. The house had been on the market for months and had never been occupied. There were no records of anyone living there recently, let alone hosting a garage sale. To this day, I don't know who that man was or what really happened in that basement. All I know is that I'll never walk into a strange place without thinking twice again. I was in need of money, and like many teenagers, I went straight to Craigslist to look for a job I could do in my free time. That's when I found a babysitting ad. It didn't provide many details, just that they needed someone to look after a child while they worked downstairs. It seemed simple enough, and the pay was good. I sent a message through the site, and to my surprise, they replied the same day and scheduled an interview. The address was about a 20-minute bus ride from my house, so it felt like a good opportunity. On the day of the interview, I arrived at their house around 3 in the afternoon. It was a quiet neighborhood, full of trees, and the houses had that old, well-maintained look. Their house was bigger than I expected, with a rusty iron gate and huge windows. I knocked on the door, and a couple in their 40s answered. They seemed friendly enough, but there was something odd about the way they spoke. Every time I asked a question, they'd take a moment before responding, as if they were overthinking their answers. I chalked it up to nervousness or something like that. I was nervous too, after all. They invited me in, and the inside of the house was even older than I imagined. The furniture was dark. There was a slightly sweet smell in the air like old wood, and the walls were covered in lifeless landscape paintings. The woman asked me to sit while the man offered me something to drink. I declined, but he brought me a glass of water anyway. During the conversation, they started explaining my responsibilities, looking after the child, making sure they ate, and keeping them away from their downstairs office. That's when I heard a noise upstairs for the first time. It sounded like something had fallen to the floor, but they didn't seem to notice. I couldn't ignore the sound, so I casually asked, "Is your daughter upstairs?" They exchanged a glance, and the man let out a nervous chuckle before replying, "No, she's not home right now." I found that odd because just a few seconds later, I heard another sound, like something being dragged. It was soft but impossible to ignore. I instinctively looked up at the ceiling, and almost immediately, I heard what sounded like a muffled child's laugh coming from above. My heart started racing, but I pretended not to be scared. I told myself they must have forgotten to mention another child or something. After that laugh, I started to feel uneasy. My gut was telling me something was off, but I didn't want to seem paranoid in front of them. While we continued talking, my attention was split between what they were saying and the noises upstairs. The man, noticing that I kept glancing at the ceiling, suddenly said, "Don't worry, the house is old. It makes noises sometimes." He said it with a strange smile, but it didn't make sense to me. The sound I heard wasn't something an old house would make. It was too clear, too specific. But I decided not to push it. The woman stood up and suggested that I take a tour of the house to get familiar with it. I followed her to the staircase, and as we climbed, I got that creepy feeling like someone was watching me. I turned around instinctively, but the man was still sitting there staring at me. He didn't smile or blink. He just stayed there, frozen. My heart sped up again, but I kept climbing. Upstairs there was a narrow hallway with 3 closed doors. The woman opened the first door and showed me the room I'd stay in if I ever needed to sleep over. The room was small and simple, but what caught my attention was the only toy in the room, a vintage doll sitting in a chair by the bed. As she explained something about schedules, I noticed the doll was facing the doorway, as if it was staring at me. It was the kind of thing you see and try not to overthink, but it made me feel uncomfortable. As soon as we stepped out of the room, I heard a faint noise coming from the last door at the end of the hallway. It was soft, like something tapping on wood. I asked what was in there, and without hesitation the woman said, "Oh, that's just a storage room, nothing important." But I could have sworn I heard something scratching from inside. When she noticed I was staring at the door longer than I should, she quickly changed the subject, pointing out the bathroom and leading me back downstairs. Back in the living room, the atmosphere felt even heavier. The man said something about starting the following week, but the way he said it was strange, like it wasn't a suggestion, but a command. I casually asked again about the child, trying not to sound suspicious. "You only have one daughter, right?" This time, they both stared at me for a few seconds, like I'd said something I shouldn't have. "We don't have any kids," the woman said firmly, her tone leaving no room for argument. I laughed, thinking they were joking, but their faces stayed serious. Very serious. Before I could ask anything else, the man stood up and said, "Well, I think that's it for today. We'll see you on Monday." I left that house with a horrible feeling. Something was wrong, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. My head was spinning with questions. Who was upstairs? And why did they say they didn't have kids when the ad clearly mentioned babysitting? The laugh I heard kept echoing in my mind, and the more I thought about it, the more confused I became. I took the bus home, trying to rationalize everything. Maybe they were testing my patience or something? Or worse, maybe the ad was fake, and they wanted something else. I started wondering if I should even go back the next week. When I got home, I told my best friend about what happened. She laughed, saying I was probably overreacting, that the sound could have been anything, a radio or a toy with old batteries. But something inside me knew it wasn't that simple. I decided to look up the house online, see if I could find any information about the owners or the property. I didn't find anything about them, but I did discover that the house had been sold multiple times in the past few years. That only made me more suspicious. Why would anyone sell such a nice house in such a quiet neighborhood so often? I spent the next few days debating what to do. Part of me wanted to call and say I'd changed my mind, but another part thought I was just being too paranoid. Deep down, I didn't want to seem like a coward, and I still needed the money. So on Monday, I decided to show up. When I got there, it looked like no one was home. The windows were closed, and there wasn't any light coming from under the door, but I rang the bell anyway. After a few seconds, the woman opened the door with that same strange smile. She invited me in and said she'd show me where the child's things were. This time, I didn't hear any noises from upstairs, but the atmosphere felt even heavier than the first time. She led me straight to the hallway and opened the door to the room I'd seen before, but something was different. The doll that had been sitting in the chair was gone. I casually asked where it was, but she just shrugged and said, "It's probably somewhere else." When she left the room, I took the chance to look around. That's when I heard it again. The sound of something moving, faint but clear, coming from the end of the hallway. That door, the storage room. My heart was racing, but I couldn't resist the curiosity. I walked toward it and placed my hand on the doorknob. The doorknob was cold and slightly loose, as if the door had been opened and closed many times. Before I could think twice, I turned it and opened a small crack. The smell that came out was strong, somewhere between mold and something rotting. My stomach churned instantly. The hallway light barely illuminated the inside, but I could see stacked boxes and hanging fabrics. It was exactly what she said, a storage room. At least, that's what it looked like at first glance. Then I heard a low sound, almost like a whisper. It wasn't my imagination. My heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest, but before I could step inside, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I almost screamed, but it was the woman. She was standing behind me with the most serious expression I'd seen so far. "This isn't part of your job," she said, slamming the door shut. The sound echoed down the hallway, and I felt like a child being scolded. I apologized, but inside, every instinct was screaming at me to get out of that house. She guided me back to the living room where the man was sitting, watching me with that same unblinking stare. He smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "That's enough for today. We'll call you if we need you before next week." It felt like both a goodbye and an order to leave immediately. I left almost running, but as I reached the gate I glanced up at one of the upstairs windows. I swear I saw something move inside. It was quick, like a shadow, but it was there. My whole body was shaking as I walked back to the bus stop. On the way home I kept replaying everything in my head. The laugh I heard, the dragging sound, the missing doll, and now that storage room. I tried to convince myself it was all just a coincidence, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. After that day, I never went back. They didn't call me and I never tried to contact them. But to this day, I can't get that house out of my mind. I keep wondering what was behind that door and who, or what, was upstairs. Maybe it's better I never find out, but one thing's for sure. If a job seems too good to be true, it probably is. And if you ever hear laughter where there shouldn't be any, just leave. Just leave.